A Hezbollah rocket attack today killed an Israeli citizen. That's 3 days after the attack that killed 12 children and young adults who were playing football. And of course, these are the rockets that hit. Some of them don't hit. Israel has yet to respond, at least as of when we went live with the Daily Objective. I haven't checked the news for the last 30 minutes. Um, and yeah, Israel gets daily reminders that it is surrounded by savages who have no desires in life, no human appropriate desires. Their only desire is to kill all the Jews, and the Jews in Israel, of course, are right there, and they will be the first to go. Um, Israel seems to refuse to acknowledge that and has refused to acknowledge that for a long time, begging for peace, offering, whatever the Palestinians say that they want, and then discovering that that is not actually what they want. What they want is to kill all the Jews. And Israel says, well, maybe we haven't begged enough. Internal turmoil in Israel has been going on for a few years. There have been, was it 5 elections? I've lost count in something like 4 years. The After the result of the previous election, the coalition government, which was called the most right-wing government in Israel's history, decided that their main policy of their government will be a judicial reform, a reform of a much needed, a problematic judicial system in very much in need of reform, but because it is too powerful. But the idea for the reform was instead to keep that power within the branches of government, just move it to the executive branch. So that sparked protests and counter protests, and protests, the kind of protests that violate rights, block the roads. They were essentially riots. October 7th seemed to have put that on pause for a while Israelis united in realization that, or in seeming realization that there's a problem with the Palestinians, at least, that needs to be solved. It needs to be solved militarily. Netanyahu's weakness, his government's weakness, of course, in how they chose to fight this war has led to a war that is 10 months in nearly and doesn't seem anywhere near ending, and is not successful, which of course leads to more protests and counter protests. Again, protest is a kind word. These are more like riots. People have a weekly protest demanding the release of hostages in Israel. And this demand is not some protest that they imagine Hamas will listen to when they say, Hamas, you should release the hostages. This is a demand that Israel, who is negotiating with Hamas, offering them essentially to stay in power, offering to release murderers in exchange for those hostages. It's a demand that the Israeli government capitulate more than it already is. Yesterday, Israeli soldiers were arrested, being accused of sexually abusing a Palestinian detainee, and protesters broke into that military base. Israel is in a very, very bad situation with its internal politics, a terrible situation in its diplomatic relations, and a suicidal mission in how it is executing or refusing to execute the war. Welcome to the reality show. I'm joined by Daniel, Marco, Richard. Um, Hopefully my longer than usual intro for this show was the most depressing part of it, but I'm not sure it will be. Marco.
Well, yes. I mean, before October 7, Israel was hardly a state or a country at peace with itself, because of the Netanyahu-sponsored reform of the judiciary, which would have made an imperfect system even more laughable. has caused internal divisions, and we're talking about serious division. There was a massive, especially from the left, there was a massive fight back in order to stop, and in fact, they managed to delay these reforms. And then now, nearly 300 days into the response to the Gazans events, we are now seeing effectively the the internal conflict resurfacing again. We have people weary of war who are asking for negotiation with Hamas. We're seeing people, you know, trying to push the government even further. And even within the government itself, we're beginning to see cracks and struggle for power in different direction. So yeah, it's not a proper civil war, but I think the title of this episode is pretty appropriate because as things stand at the moment, we are seeing a population that are fighting itself to a ridiculous extent because in the past certain dictators and a certain states, in order to strengthen politically within the state, they would declare war on somebody else in order to focus the effort onto a common enemy. But here there is a common enemy, but the internal divisions are still there.
And it's the culmination of a lot of tensions that have existed for some time and have been on display long before October the 7th. I think in the last couple of days have been an unedifying spectacle, both in seeing not only some members of the public and their attitudes at the gates of IDF compounds, etc., but also the fact that elected politicians have also had some physical involvement there at those sites as well as seeing some of the key divisions between members of the key cabinet, the unity government, which existed long before and have held together through the need to fight this war. But those cracks have begun to show quite substantially. I do want to make a second point really clear, which is I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing Israel, the people, and the culture from a UK standpoint, where I think the UK would be any better, because I think the UK is of a similar kind of culture, and some of our divisions in the UK over the past few years have been equally of a contentious and fractious nature. There's not direct comparisons necessarily between like Brexit, for example, and the judicial reforms, but certainly in terms of how it's been whipped up and how both sides have tried any technique at many times to push their agendas forward, and that has never been an edifying spectacle to witness or watch, whatever your views of things are. And of course, add to that being at war for 10 months in a situation where the rest of the world is telling you that you should not escalate, you should not defend yourself, you should pull back, and that you're being somehow harsh. And of course, knowing that all of the large portion of left wing, for example, that will be mirrored in the UK, I would well imagine a pretty similar a spectacle could occur some 10 months into some sort of equivalent here in the UK. Now, that's entirely speculative, but I'm just trying to make the point that I don't think there's a cultural difference here. I think it's a state of the lack of confidence in a culture, the lack of confidence in the morality that you should be standing up for as a country, and therefore people pulling in their tribalistic directions when things become messy because the war hasn't been finished as swiftly and cleanly and with the resolve that it could have been, were those many voices, insisting people hold back, were not endlessly listened to. So those are my opening remarks.
Daniel, before I go to you, just quickly, Zoe, yeah, check right after this show if you can access members only YouTube content. If not, just drop us a quick email on the website and we'll get back to you immediately. Daniel.
So, yeah, I think Israel is not experiencing anything unique. I think something that has been a problem with the modern politics is the fact that tribalism has basically taken over. It's no longer, and it's hard to say if it ever really has been that much, but it's not really about what's the right policy, what's the right way to conduct the war, what's the right way to reform the judiciary. It's they want to do it and we don't. They want to reform judiciary, we hate them, so we are going to protest and riot against that. And that's pretty much everything, there is about it. Because yeah, I've been looking up the the Israeli judiciary system, and the proposed reform. And I think, as Razi mentioned, there are many problems with the way Israeli judiciary system works. It's also very unique. I think it's the only it's almost the only nation that pretty much does it in this way. For those who don't know, basically there is like a separate judiciary, supposedly independent committee that has like 9 members from sort of like different areas. Some are elected officials, some are some are directly from the Supreme Court, some are picked. It's kind of messy, but the sort of proposed solution is basically, yeah, the it should all be in the power of, in a sense, executive and legislature, which maybe brings me to the broader point of the Israeli politics, is the fact that I really hate parliamentary systems. I think the big problem when it comes to parliamentary systems is that you have this sort of, basically when you elect your legislature body, you are also electing all of the executive body. So there is no separation power in that area. Not to mention, Israel only has a unicameral system, basically meaning only one legislative body, instead of, for example, even UK has the House of Lords and the House of Commons, but I think much better system. The US has the Senate and the House. Israel doesn't have any of that. And if this judiciary reform would pass, it would basically mean that one election is completely going to change everything, can potentially completely change everything, because it would have complete power over all branches of the government. But yeah, this sort of idea of tribalism, it really is everywhere. I think even when it comes to sort of opposing or supporting the war, it is very tribal. You are either, in a sense, with the coalition, and even the coalition isn't fully waging the war in the way it should be. Similarly, something I really dislike. So we talked about, or we mentioned that story about supposedly some Israeli soldiers have sexually abused a detainee. I mean, I think everything should be investigated. If something was done not in accordance of whatever Israeli law is, or whatever sort of like a military law is, it should be investigated, and it should be dealt with appropriately. Something I really don't like is when pretty much all, in a sense, we lose complete belief in the system, and it's pretty much all just the power of muscles. We go in and we save them because we think the system has failed. Once the system has failed, yeah, in a sense, there is no more argument for Israel. Once Israel stops being a country that has process in place, that has a democratic system, that does respect individual rights, you are really losing basically what makes Israel unique when it comes to Middle East.
Yeah, I think Israel, to use a basketball analogy, has fouls to give, like before it becomes like the rest of the Middle East. Even if this reform passed and it's a bad one, Israel would still be by far the best country in the Middle East. It would just be not as good as it was the day before the reform was passed. And again, if a different reform was passed, that would be even better, because it's a system that needs to be reformed. It's just the executive doesn't need more power. And by the way, I completely agree with you. Yeah, a country needs to have a separate elected executive branch, and one house of parliament is not enough, because you need to make it more difficult to pass the kind of crap that politicians like to pass. Thank you, Crusader General, for the super chat. Crusader General says, if Israel falls, the West will be ruled by a global caliphate within 15 years. I don't think
Can I
so.
comment on that?
Yes, but I want to comment on it first. I don't think so. I think bad things are coming, and I think the fall of Israel will be kind of an indication that bad things are coming quicker than you would think. But I also think there are people who oppose it and oppose it not with a much better alternative, and they might come into power. There are many bad ideas. The political spectrum is, a spectrum of many, many bad variations on the same theme. So something bad will happen. Maybe it'll be a caliphate. Maybe it'll be some form of fascism. I don't know. Maybe Greta will be the president of the world. But yeah, I don't think something good is coming. Do you want to comment on it quickly now so I can continue, or do you want to comment it on it?
I want to comment quickly. I think I could kind of see that. I think we have three nations that by no means are in a sense the sort of like a military defense for us, or sort of if they fall, they'll overrun us. But I think, and the three nations I'm thinking about is Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. I think there is a certain symbolism if those countries were to fall, if those countries were taken over. It would basically signify the Western powers no longer have a backbone to basically support the freer nations, have no longer the moral confidence in their system and in the systems of countries such as them. So while I don't think it would be basically that, now that these three nations are gone, in a sense we'll get run over, I think the West, I think, will always be stronger. But will it have the moral confidence to actually defend itself? Which is actually, I think, the only thing that matters. Israel can have all the power it wants, but if it's not willing to use it, it's gonna be pointless.
Yeah, I mean, look, Israel is quicker to defeat itself from within, but I think the same problems are happening with the West. Yeah, the fact that the West is militarily stronger doesn't mean that the West can't lose. Just like Israel is militarily stronger and is not, is losing. Uh, Thank you, Enoch Powell, if that is your real name, for the super chat. It is to Canadian dollars, so it's not the original. Also, the original is dead, right? And it's spelled differently. Um, but yeah, there was a point here by who was it? Sammy, which I want to address, and I will when we come back to me. Marco.
Yeah, going back to the judiciary system, I mean, that seen from the outside, not experiencing on the ground in Israel, seems quite bizarre. For example, in July 23rd, 2023, they passed this legislation which takes away from, first of all, I should explain that the Supreme Court has got this power which can use to veto legislation which doesn't find in accord to legislation. So Netanyahu could pass some stuff, and they say, no, we don't like it, throw it out. And there was always a slant towards the left. So right-wing legislation would be the target of this power largely. I'm generalizing, it's not exactly every time. But anyway, in July 23, they passed a legislation whereby the power of the Supreme Court was taken away. And the Supreme Court in January effectively vetoed this legislation. So it's a bit bizarre. So do you really have you got such a big problem in the first place? I don't understand. But going back to what you guys were talking about, it's like if you listen to James Valiant's course on the Constitution, the United States Constitution, you will realize why certain powers had to be designed a certain way for America to succeed, and why there is a degree of non-democratic. For example, the Senate, you get two senators for each state, disregarded of the number of people in those states. So there's always a degree of separation and and barriers put in order to stop the executive from taking over. And that's how Israel should have been. The structure of the Israeli government should have been really designed in the first place. You had this fantastic example of the U.S. Constitution, but no, they decided to go for this weird hybrid. That, to be honest, if you really wanted to reform it and go down the route, probably you should have created a second chamber just to before you tackle the judiciary. But the whole thing seems to have been done haphazardly. And as Daniel was mentioning, because tribalism has become a thing since probably the end of Bush second, when we used to talk about polarization, which is effectively tribalism. This thing has gone worse and worse. As Daniel pointed out, nothing that one side will do will ever be taken with any degree of certainty, and there's not going to be a conversation between the two parties because it's on my lot. Therefore, I'm not even going to listen. And we see more of this, and we've seen also the result of this, which is chaos, unending chaos.
Let me just quickly jump in. Thank you, Best Monster, for updating us because we would not have seen it otherwise. Yeah, Israel just struck in Beirut. The target was a senior Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr. I'm not sure how his name is pronounced.
Oh, I have Hajah Muhsan.
Oh yes, that is how he is. It's the same guy.
Oh,
Yeah, they have nicknames. But yeah, it does say that as well here. In Dahia in Beirut, it's not clear whether he was killed. Local sources say there are 2 people dead. And yeah, Israel says he is the guy behind the attack in Majd el-Shams. So, good, not good enough. Richard.
Yeah, I mean it's nice to see some action. It's taken what 48 hours and a lot of meetings and a lot of, I understand
72.
all that. Pardon?
72 hours.
72 hours, even worse. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and of course that always takes the effectiveness out of it to some extent. But if they've managed to get the key guy, then obviously that's great, and that's a step forward. But of course we know that this is a snake that has many heads, and that that in itself is not going to end anything. But praise where praise is due at this point, as far as we know. So yeah. So returning to the topic that we were talking about, I just wanted to add to what Marco was saying, the extra complication of some of the personalities involved in Israeli politics, and particularly in Netanyahu, for example, and the fact that the Attorney General had prevented him from being involved in the judicial reform as it went through Parliament because of his own anti-corruption cases. And that is messy and again unedifying to see all of that internal conflict taking place. And of course the conflict between between Gallant and Ben-Gvir, which came to the head again most recently with trading blows over who was holding back the police at the IDF base or not, whether Ben-Gvir held the police back from intervening against the supposed, in inverted commas, far right protesters at the gates, and of course, the retaliation that from Ben-Gvir to Gallant that October the 7th was not properly prepared for, and whether he held back information knowing it was coming from Netanyahu. So all of that becomes a horrible political political rivalry, mudslinging, and none of that is what you want to see at a time when you want unity most of all. And of course, when you look back before October the 7th, you could see Isaac Herzog calling for unity among politicians long before October 7th had even occurred because of the damage it was doing to Israeli civil unity. So all of the threads have been there for some time. And I think it's no surprise that with the strain of war, that they're coming to a head like they have been.
Yeah, Herzog, just for people who aren't that familiar with Israel, is the president of Israel, which is a meaningless position. And uh, yeah. Just also quickly, Daniel, before I go to you, Soupy Cask mentions apparently the U.S. was begging Israel not to strike Beirut. Yeah, I've seen such reports as well, which makes this a bit more of a positive thing. If it's just a statement of sorts, look, when we have to do something, we'll do it, even if the current U.S. leadership doesn't want us to. That's good. Then again, if this is where you waste your, freebies or whatever you want to call it, when you can do something that America want to approve of, I'd want to see a bit more. But again, let's see what comes out of it. This is the best news that we've had in these last few days. So yeah, we'll I'm sure know more by tomorrow's shows. Daniel.
I mean, honestly, yeah, this is not enough. Something I've read, I think one day after the attack on the village in Golan Heights, is that mm, I'm not sure where I've read it, but it was something along the lines of it's rare for Israel not to, in a sense, have any response right after the attack. So it's a sign that it's preparing maybe some extensive operation or something like that. And if this is the result after waiting 3 days, just one attack targeting one person, and specifically just someone who again, the attack on Golan Heights, that wasn't the only one. That's not the only thing that happened on that day. There were many different attacks. What about them? What about the people who were behind those? What about all of Hezbollah who has been behind behind the attacks on Israel since a few weeks after October 7th? Like, this is weakness. This is It's not actually showing the proper response. The proper response is, something that I think Michael mentioned yesterday. What happened in Yemen? That that was something that was really appropriate. It was disproportionate. It was much stronger. It wasn't proportional. It was strong. It showed Israel that, yeah, we will defend ourselves, and you will suffer if you try to even touch us. But this, I think, is nothing that, yeah, unless
Yeah.
something big happens after this.
Um, So this is kind of a step up, because up until now Israel has only been killing the foot soldiers on the ground in southern Lebanon, and of course selectively, and not many of them. So in that sense, that's a positive. But yeah, you need both. You need to kill the commanders, and you need to kind of at least push back the part of Lebanon where they can fire from. Now, I wonder if we should do a whole separate episode. We might actually do that, about the history of Israel with Lebanon, the disgraceful retreat from Lebanon in 2000 by Ehud Barak, who was prime minister for 18 months, and in 18 months managed to give Netanyahu a run for his money, as you know, potentially the worst in history. And now a few days ago, he called for civil disobedience in the protest where there is civil disobedience. If you want to call breaking the law civil disobedience, it is, but not always. Um, so yeah, Israel's history with Lebanon uh, again allowed Hezbollah to become as powerful as it is now, and sent a message to others, like Israel has been sending a message since October 7th, that it's not going to do what needs to be done. In that context, Ari says in the chat, the entire Israeli army top are leftists, or all leftists. Not one general was punished for October 7th incompetence. Instead, they jailed Jewish soldiers and defend Islamo-Nazis. The Israeli left is the fifth column. That is partially true, but the army works for the government, not the other way around. And if the top generals are leftists and are pushing a left-wing agenda, that is the fault of the government. The government sets the course. and they can say, no, don't, you're not training soldiers to avoid civilian casualties on the enemy side. You're training soldiers to kill the enemy and defend Israeli citizens first and foremost, and then defend yourselves as soldiers before you think about the enemy. So that's Israeli policy. Netanyahu has a say on whether a bomb is dropped from a plane or foot soldiers enter a building that a bomb could be dropped on. And so, yeah, again, I'm sure you're right about the makeup of the army, but that is the fault of the leadership, and Netanyahu has been the leader for long enough that it's his personal fault. Um, yeah, a couple more things about, by the way, something else that I want to say is that, we have a lot to say, as you may have noticed, and that's why we're here twice a day on weekdays and then once a day on weekends. But sometimes we will say what we have to say in writing as well, because that's a better kind of edited way of expressing views where you don't have these pauses like when I'm trying to think of what I'm saying. And it's it's clearer, and just some people like to consume written content more than videos or podcasts. And yeah, the world I believe needs what we're doing very much. So we're going to do it in as many ways as possible to hopefully prevent what I think is coming. And for that purpose, we are launching our Substack. I believe we will launch it tomorrow. And the first article there is by Marco. It is about essentially about what we talk about on this channel, why it's important, why complaints about the fact that we talk about this on the channel, what the problem is with them, and yeah, we have. So that'll be the first article on our paid Substack. Some articles will be free. This will not. There is you can sign up monthly. You get access to it as a member of ARCUK at the gold level or above, or a YouTube member, Inner Circle member. So there is a link in the chat and in the description. Back to the topic. So uh, Sammy said earlier something about the number of parties in Israel. And is that part of the problem? I think it's a symptom of the problem. Yeah, Israel has never had in the UK we have a parliamentary system, but usually the party in power wins a majority of seats. It's not unheard of that that doesn't happen, and then there's a coalition, but then it's a coalition of two parties. Never has in history of the history of Israel has that happened. It's always a coalition. It's almost always a coalition of multiple parties. Then the opposition is multiple parties, or multiple parties that don't make it into parliament. And Yeah, it is a society that has its kind of built-in divisions, many of which I think don't make sense. Some of them are, religious parties, and religious parties of different types of the same religion, and then left-wing parties. You don't really have, from time to time you have a free market party pop up, and usually they don't make it to parliament. So yeah, it's a mixture of bad ideas, unfortunately, and those are represented in parliament and in Israeli politics. And yeah, so I think that's part of the problem. I'll have more to say about how the particular problem manifests itself nowadays. Marco.
Well, and lots of meat on that barbecue. Well, first of all, the IDF and the leftiness in the IDF. Well, that was clear during the protests in 2023, because big chunk of the protests were actually attended and organized by former IDF personnel. So that's not a big shock. But yeah, as Razi pointed out, in the end, it should be the leadership that decide what the IDF does and how it behaves. So, also for course on that one. And the response on Hezbollah itself, yeah, it should have been an immediate response. as Razi mentioned, the south of Lebanon, it's not like full of factories and nurseries and schools and hospitals. It's just mainly barren land, which is used for training by Hezbollah and for attacking Israel. That's why there's supposed to be a buffer zone, um, which is never respected by them in the first place. So the response should be bomb the hell out of the whole area. And at the same time, hopefully, you're going to not only hit the single guy that probably you would have hit anyway, like you done in the past, but you would have also hit the foot soldier and the equipment that they had in place at that point. You give them, what was it, 72 hours notice. And what do they do? They remove the equipment. They remove the weapons. They remove the sophisticated rocket launchers. So the whole approach is laughable. But then again, Netanyahu, uh, it is effectively said, "Oh yeah, be careful, Hezbollah. If you attack us, you regret and blah blah blah," with this kind of rhetoric that sounds incredibly good. But then at the same time, he said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna respond, but it's gonna be something not excessive. We're gonna respond in kind, effectively." And the problem with Netanyahu is really that there isn't a succession in anywhere in sight, which seems to be the curse that is plaguing Britain, United States, clearly Israel. There's never an alternative to the guy in power. And if the guy on the other side happens to gain power, it's just because there's no opposition, effectively. Um, and that's, I think, the tragedy of having this kind of tribalist and polarized politics that we're living in now, because you can never have a sort of understanding and coming to a common ground, which is bread and butter of politics, really. So if you try and create a single monolithic one side against a single monolithic opposite, you're never really going to get anywhere, because the stuff will fall in between the cracks. And that's the lack of hope, really, because even if you remove Netanyahu, who's going to left you with a bunch of people who bicker with each other all the time, a bunch of people who have to, like Netanyahu, rely on some wacko, super nationalistic, religious people. Uh, you know, that's not a future, is it?
And when you look at some of the people, some of the politicians involved at the gates of the IDF military compound where the disturbance was, you included the heritage minister from Ben Gvir's party, included members from Netanyahu's Likud party, included religious Zionist members of the Knesset. So again, it's not, all right, they may be all one side of the spectrum, but nevertheless, there's quite a fractious consensusness to it, if that's not a contradiction in terms. I think what your comparison with the UK having like two main parties, I think the only thing that doesn't cover is the fact that those can be very big tents within those individual parties, and you can have quite a span of opinion. And the difference between Corbyn's Labour Party and Tony Blair's Labour Party, despite it having the same name in both instances, is quite markedly different. And of course, I'm not even referring to Keir Starmer's Labour Party, because I'm not certain what it is yet, and only time will tell exactly what it will be. One of the things that I wanted to bring out as a question is there really any legitimacy to the concern that these 9 IDF soldiers would not receive a fair hearing concerning the things that they were accused of? Because that would seem to be unlikely from my perspective, that they wouldn't receive a fair hearing, and that this wouldn't be examined thoroughly, and therefore that renders a lot of the protests unnecessary and premature and incredibly inopportune at this current time.
Daniel.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have much to add up, but there were a few comments in the chat I'd like to comment on. There was one talking about basically what happened at that military camp with the supposedly the Israeli soldiers sexually assaulting or abusing a Palestinian prisoner. And someone has been calling for international investigation. And I think similarly to the attack on Golan Heights, it should have international organization. And I think those people, if you hate Israel, you should honestly just like say that. But these demands for international organizations, as if like Israel is not a sovereign country that has systems for investigation, for conducting investigation. I mean, imagine if there was just some random murder in Germany, and yeah, there should be an international investigation of that. Uh, it's just completely ridiculous. And again, when it comes to these Palestinian prisoners, you have to remember, who are they? They are the people who entered Israel on October 7th with the goal of killing Jews. That was why they're there. I mean, honestly, I mean, not to go maybe too crazy, but why are there any prisoners? Why should, yeah, basically, why should you? Again, this is not something like we are living in a lawful society and there is a murder and we have a trial and a just uh, basically we try to arrive to justice, have actual investigation. We know what happened. These people have entered Israel with the only purpose of killing Jews. That there is no reasonable doubt after that. You don't just stumble upon, you don't go on a walk and I went on a walk on October 7th and I somehow ended up in Israel and might as well kill some Jews while I'm there. Like, we know why these people are there. I still don't understand what's the reason for leaving them in prison, in jail.
Well,
If
so
not, just to release them so they can go and kill Israelis again.
well, chances are they were pumped for information for intelligence. And that's the point. The guy was found battered. We don't know exactly what happened. But even if they were punching him in the face until he was coming up with the information that they needed, information about hostages, who cares? It's his choice. If you don't want to be punched in the face, don't join Hamas and don't go and kill Jews. Easy.
Yeah, I mean, so I have to say, first of all, I find these protests very problematic, breaking into a military base. Uh, but I don't see any issue with the anger and the anger there. And yeah, Richard, you made the point that, are people thinking the soldiers won't, get a fair hearing? That's not the point. The point is within the context of this war that Israel has refused to fight. Israel has refused to bring justice to the Palestinian people for what they did on October 7th, for what they've been doing for decades. Israel keeps rewarding them for it, feeding them, and then this instant, if a terrorist who participated on October 7th, um, was sexually abused, I don't care, really. I think, uh, yeah, if Marco, I think you're optimistic when you say they were just trying to get information out of them. No, they're being held as prisoners. And Michael, although I don't assume that he's going to agree with what I'm saying here, but Michael makes the point that this isn't like somebody who committed a crime and gets due process. This is a war. They invaded Israel. They deserve to have information taken out of them by whatever means necessary, and then they don't deserve to live. And that's it. So that's my position on this. And again, I would not absolutely not break into a military base, and I think that's a very serious issue with Israel. First of all, that anybody would do that. Second of all, that they can do that. But let's stop caring about. I mean, this is taking the general argument about why Israel is wrong, and the arguments in the world about women and children being harmed. This is an individual who participated in the atrocities. They have no right to their life, and they have no right while they're still alive to anything but suffering and then death.
Uh, One point. So we have one troll in our chat saying they found breaches in the wall that previously would have ventilated them if they approach within 100 meters. Yeah, if you're a Palestinian in Gaza, don't approach the border. It is there for a reason. It is there because Palestinians have tried to kill Jews in the past, and this was the sort of like a cowardly solution, basically putting up the wall instead of actually going in and eliminating the actual threat. But yeah, don't go to the border. And people are also bringing up the idea that torture or sexual assaults should never be acceptable. So something about that. The thing is that I mean, so I think we had once a discussion about torture where we talked about is it appropriate, is it not appropriate, does it work, does it not? When it comes to these things, I think the only thing that you care about is your own soldiers. Basically, if you have something like a torture, basically someone has to do it. Some person, some soldier has to do it. Is it worth it to basically, yeah, I I think it's like a psychology question and basically a tactical question. If there is a Israeli soldier that basically does torture, someone who tried to murder Jews or did murder Jews to get information out of him, is it basically harmful to that soldier to basically do it? Or in a sense, is that sort of like trade-off worth it for information if we know information from torture can be reliable? That's the only question there is. Does it work? Is it practical? There is no question in a sense like, do these people have rights? No, they have given up on the idea that they have rights. They entered a conflict that by definition is trying to violate the rights of all the citizens of that nations. And by that mark, they have basically given up any sort of, any sort of demanding of rights.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, to the point that you made earlier, Razi, I understand this is a distraction from the essential issues, and it is showing the fractious face, and I understand that anger at the gates of the compounds is not related to in necessarily the particular case we're talking about, but the frustration that the Palestinians haven't been treated as the enemy to the extent they should have been, and that Israel is being treated as its own enemy half the time by itself. And that is clearly a problem. And of course, the double standard that people from Hamas, people from Hezbollah, Palestinians in general, to the extent there's any form of distinction, don't receive any of the same level of scrutiny that we're talking about here for far worse crimes. And it's very difficult to talk about the validity or not of torture when you suddenly extract it from all the context and we become extremely speculative about what happened to whom and where, and that enters its own difficulties for discussing it in any detail. But I'm sure that any evidence necessary there will emerge over time. More is the overarching problem that this is showing the tensions at every level in Israel, and those tensions exist because of the lack of certainty, moral certainty that's been on show since October the 7th. And had it been more decisive and more on show, then those tensions wouldn't have had the time to fester and come to light as they have.
I'd like to say something about the torture thing. I mean, torture is not intrinsically good or bad. If you torture somebody because you're bored and you don't know what to do, well, that's clearly bad. But if you torture this guy because he was picked up, I think in central Gaza a few days ago, clearly it was in a base as well because he knew something that the IDF wanted to find out. So it was in their right to use any means necessary to get the truth and information out of it. The information this guy holds, like every other innocent Palestinian, is about where the remaining hostages are, because there are still hostages in Gaza. Let's not forget this. There are still people in Gaza who know perfectly well where they are, and there are still people in Gaza who, despite playing the victim all the time, are actually holding them away from the family, and hiding them from the IDF. So let's not pretend that torture is bad. Oh my God, it's so scary. Well, yeah, it depends on the context. Like everything else, you cannot be intrinsicist and decide that something is bad because it's bad in itself. That doesn't stack up. That leads you to October the 7th, and that's why things are going not very well.
Yeah. See, there's a lot of chat in the chat about my comment. Let me just make it clear that I completely stand by it. I mean, yeah, a terrorist participating in October 7th, their only role on this planet while they're still on it is to give any information that can help Israel defeat Hamas, rescue the hostages, and that's it. And whatever needs to be done to such people. Now, the whole issue of is it effective or not, that's an issue that is what matters when you decide what you're going to do. But of course, it's effective in many cases. Like if they're still there and they know they're going to pay a much higher price than they're already paying if the information turns out not to be true, then they will want to they will want to make sure that they give the correct information. What type of pain and suffering they go through, I don't care. I hope it's bad, and I hope they die as soon as possible. And yeah, I stand by that. Um, yeah, there's a lot more to say, unfortunately, about Israel's internal turmoil. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and we're not going to get to because the show is almost over, is how the media, the mainstream left-wing media in Israel, covers the riots, the weekly riots, with the demands of releasing the hostages by a deal that is whatever Hamas says it wants, and even if Hamas gets what it says it wants and then changes its mind, Israel is to blame for that. Those are reported very favorably, and of course, yesterday's protests again, problematic, shouldn't have happened. Protests in military bases were reported, in the way that such stuff should be reported, but always, not just when it's your side or the other side. And I think that's a big part of it. That's a big part of the problem in Israel. These riots against the judicial reform were bad, but the media supported the cause, so they reported it as something positive. And it's very problematic. There's a little bit of right-wing media now in Israel. There's Channel 14, which is a religious right, and there's I believe there's Israel Hayom is the only still main newspaper, and that's kind of right wing, but very pro Netanyahu, and it's yeah, and you hear by the way, calls from left wing politicians to close those media outlets because they don't conform to what the left would like the media to report and how they would like it to report. So, yeah, unfortunately, we will be talking some more about Israel's internal turmoil. Hopefully, people in Israel will watch this show or our other shows and reconsider their positions on everything. But until then, I think we're still gonna have to do what we do. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Any final thoughts, Marco?
Well, yeah, of course, all these lefties are the same lefties that were slaughtered by the thousands, of the hundreds in the kibbutz on October 7th. There were the same people that were arguing for moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel, and that they got killed for it. Yeah, and that's why when the next vice president of the United States talks about childless women, cat ladies are causing problems, the left, oh my God, you can't say that. But when your own side, the side you protect, slaughters you and your colleagues, that's fine. We don't talk about it. It's Netanyahu's fault. It's the far right.
One of the lefty cries during the judicial review period, all the protests in 2023, the early part was that one of the phrases used was the Talibanization of Israel. a piece of extreme hyperbole, but you're going to see the can't say the word, Talibanization of Israel for real without the unity to fight against Islamist enemies at its borders all over the place. And that is the more pressing issue.
Daniel.
So since we've been talking a lot about torture, I'll just make one last point. I mean, many people are, I think, largely trying to drop the context and sort of like starting with the idea that torture is wrong and justifying it. Well, I think the right approach is, yeah, is it practical or is it not? And again, when it comes to these people, and by these people, I mean the Palestinians who have attacked Israel on October 7th, they no longer have any rights. They no longer have any basically claim to life. The only reasoning you have right now is what is effective, what is the best way to basically make use of them. If we can extract the information with this tactic, it should be done. I don't have any and someone mentioned the idea that you wouldn't want your sister getting tortured. Again, this is like so much of like dropping context. Yeah, like I would never want to get tortured. But again, if I went into some country, attacked the country, and basically my only reason there was to basically kill those people, yeah, I still probably wouldn't want to get tortured. But by that point, yeah, I have no rights. I have no basically claim to any sort of, any sort of right, basically.
How about you wouldn't want your sister being a jihadist murderer? That's a good starting point. And if she is, the fact that you share the same blood does not make you in any way have to support her. So, Marco, Richard, where can people find more from you?
On the Briefly Objective, shorter content, there's a link below. Like and subscribe, please.
And comment.
And on Substack, tomorrow, most likely, Marco will have the first essay as mentioned in our Substack. Daniel, where can people find more from you?
You can find me on YouTube. I'm Damned Dan. It's also in the YouTube description. Also, just quickly, someone says the end justify the means. No, if the ends and means are on the same side, always have to be. And again, it's not that if the end is good, if the information is good, we are okay with torture. That is bad, that we consider bad. No, if the information is good, it makes the actual action good also.
And Ayn Rand Center UK members, the Fountainhead, the Atlas Shrugged Book Club. How did that happen? This time I caught it sooner. The Atlas Shrugged Book Club starts in a couple of minutes. Members can join the Zoom call. YouTube members can watch it on YouTube starting in a couple of minutes. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks guys for joining me. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Bye.